We're going to start a new series in the book of Exodus, back to the Old Testament after spending half a year in the book of Acts. It's been a great study. This time, we're going to be moving to the Old Testament and going to be studying in the book of Exodus for a while. And we'll start reading in a couple verses in chapter 2 in just a minute. And then, isn't it interesting that over different times that names change? You know, there's when parents are expecting, maybe you did this where you went to consult some kind of a book that might have a name, all the names of potential babies. You know, those things are kind of cyclical. There are some names that they change at different times. For example, back in the 1980s, some of you may have had children born in those days, but what were some of the fashionable names from the 1980s? What were very common names back then? Michael was one of them. I have a list of the top 10. Jennifer, yes. No, John, I think, has been, even Kings, there's John the 23rd. John's really popular all the way through. Not Stephen. I would have thought Jason, too. Yeah, I do have a Jason that was born, but he was born in the late 70s. Yeah, 78. This is going to take too long. Raymond, yes, where was Raymond? Nobody guessed that right up front, did ya? It's not on there. Yeah, it's not on there. Jessica, Jennifer, Amanda, Ashley, Sarah, Michael, Christopher, Matthew, Joshua, David. Those were the top 10 in 1980s. Michael. Yep, Michael. Yeah, we've got Michaels here. But you guys were not born in the 80s. Now I've got to sell that to me. Okay. During the decade of the 2010s, from 2010 to 2020, anybody want to guess some of the top 10 names, male and female? Who? Noah is one of them. Yeah, Noah. What did you say? Jocelyn? Not on the list. That should be pretty high, though. Henry? Are you guys guessing your own children and grandchildren's names? Yeah. No, not Henry. Jordan, that'd be a good. Nope, not on there. Yeah. Frank is now naming the top 10 fast food restaurants that he likes to frequent. Here they are. Emma, Olivia, Sophia, Isabella, Ava. I thought Ava was a little bit more of a unique name, but Noah, Liam, Jacob, William, and Mason. Top 10. I think that's supposed to be Jason. It just misspelled with an M instead of a J. But you know, that explains, within 30 years, none of them are the same. Some of you have maybe grandparents. What are some names that are just, they're older names that you just hardly ever hear anymore? Go ahead, Benny. Dora. Okay, Oral and Dora. Dora the Explorer. Penny, did I see your hand? Penny? Penny? Yeah, I saw it on a show once. Yes. Opal, yeah. Maud. Yeah, you don't hear those names very often, do you? Dan? Ernest? Okay. Orville? Yep. not very common. Yeah, Elsie's another ancient name. Raymond is not an ancient name. You don't hear it very often, though. But the reason I'm even emphasizing this is, and you're right, we could go on with this, and we could come up with several others that I'm sure are just, Beth's mother's name was Edith. Don't hear that very often. I loved my mother-in-law. She was a former Miss America. Of course, there weren't many Americans back then. Okay, I just made that up. Okay, my point is this. Sometimes names change. Today we're going to be introduced here in the book of Exodus to a brand new name for God. All right? In the book of Genesis, we've been talking about God all the way through, but he's going to introduce his holiest name. And so it's a name, though, but God, as we're going to see and as we're going to explore, is going to be the same yesterday, today, and forever, right? So even though he's introducing this name and using it for the first time in the Bible, it is going to be a description of his character that will remain for all time. The name, the holiest name for God. Okay, so we're going to pick up here in the book of Exodus chapter 2. And of course, we're not going to rehearse all the history that's brought us to this point. But does anybody remember after Joseph comes down to Egypt, he has rescued not just the nation of Egypt, but so many people in the Middle East, the people who are from Canaan, his own family have moved down to Egypt. And all of a sudden, there was a king, a Pharaoh, that arose that knew not Joseph. In other words, things had been so distant from the time that Joseph rescued the nation of Egypt that there now is a native Egyptian dynasty emerging, and this Pharaoh doesn't care at all about the past. He doesn't care about who's Joseph. Help me out. How many years were the descendants of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob? Jacob, you'll remember, is going to come down during the famine. Joseph's going to bring them to Egypt. How long are they in Egypt? Say it. Okay. The New Testament uses a 430 years, but really it's said multiple times 400 years. Okay? And you'll remember that's exactly what God told Abraham in the Abrahamic covenant of Genesis 15. He said, Abraham, you're going to be spared from this, but you're going to have a great heritage. There's going to be your descendants are going to be so many they can't be counted, but they're going to be in a strange land for 400 years. And so now we're coming to the conclusion of that 400-year period. The children of Israel in bondage now for 400 years. Here in a couple years, we'll be celebrating our rich history of 250 years for the United States of America. You know what? 250 years. The Israelites were in Egypt for over 400 years. But after this new Pharaoh comes on the scene, things turn really bad for God's people. They are now turned into slaves. Chapter 1 of Exodus tells us that the Pharaoh is making them build some of these royal cities of Pithom and Ramses. And they are building it with mud clay and all those things. Then they really become oppressive. The Pharaoh makes a crazy decree. And in Egypt, Pharaoh's word was law. We have found ancient law codes in the ancient world. And you probably have read these each night from time to time, like the laws of Eshnunna, the laws of Libet Ishtar. You may recognize this one, Hammurabi's law code. And of course, Moses, in this book, we're going to get God's law through Moses. But Egypt has no law code. Why? Because Pharaoh's word was law. And so we've never found a written codification of laws in Egypt because they changed with every Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh that arose that knew not Joseph and didn't care about the fact that Joseph had rescued the nation, he now initiates this rule, this law, that these Hebrew males are a threat to our nation. And now every time a baby is born, if it's a male child, what's to happen? They're to be thrown into the Nile River. Man, terrible, unjust. But that, along with the oppression in slavery and the actual coming to this point of trying to hide their children being born so that the males would not be thrown into the river, the children of Israel start to cry out to God. And that's part of what we're going to observe today, is that God is going to respond to the crying of his people. He's going to hear them, all right? So start in chapter 2 of Exodus. I'm going to read just a couple verses here. We're going to jump over to chapter 3. Notice in verse 23 and 25. This is right after Moses is born to Zipporah and Gershom, and verse 23. And it came to pass in process of time that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham and with Isaac and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them. Okay. The reason why it emphasizes in verse 23 there that Pharaoh died, why has Moses been out of the country? Why did Moses flee Egypt? He killed an Egyptian. And when Pharaoh found out, he threatened to kill Moses. Well, Moses is long gone by then, before it even comes. But this is probably the Pharaoh who died, the one that had been after Moses for this atrocity. So how long has Moses been out of Egypt? 40 years. Moses, we don't have time to develop it, but it's such an amazing part of the story. But for the first 40 years of his life, after being pulled out of the Nile River and rescued by Pharaoh's daughter, he is raised in the household of Pharaoh. Possibly even would have been considered as a potential Pharaoh. But for 40 years, he's raised that way. Best education. Moses, by virtue of him just writing the Pentateuch, shows us he was brilliant. He was God blessed Moses with great intelligence to be able to do what he did, and then to be the leader that he will become. Then when he runs away, he's gone for 40 years. And he even referred to it as on the backside of the desert. He's a shepherd. He is being humbled during that time of exile. But now God is going to respond and fulfill the covenant promise he made to Abraham all those many centuries earlier. I will make of your nation, of your name a great nation, and I will bring them back to this place, the land of promise. Okay. I just want you to highlight with me there in verses 24 and 25 that we just read, there are really four verbs. There are four things that God does, and it reveals part of God's character in these verses. What are they? Point one out to me. God heard. Okay, good. We'll deal with that a little bit more. What's another one? God remembered. Okay, we need to deal with that. Was it all of a sudden that God, he had forgotten all about them? Had he forgotten about his covenant promise? Had he all of a sudden, it was, I forgot about them. That is not what this means. It wasn't that he remembered like he had just not been thinking about it. Of course, we understand the character of God and his attributes. He is omniscient. He's all-knowing. He knew all of this. What it means, though, in these verses is that when God heard their cry, I mean, they sighed under the burden of the Pharaoh, even this new Pharaoh. And then they're praying. They're crying out to God, asking for deliverance. And so when God remembered, it was not that he was just being reminded. It was the idea that, okay, now it was time to act. He heard their cries, and he is going to act upon what he had always promised he was going to do. Now's the time. Okay? All right, what's a couple of the other actions? He looked. All right? Again, that's not implying that he did not already know the plight of his people. But it's as if he is now considering with, again, a desire to act. He looked upon their plight. And by the way, in that covenant thing that he had given to Abraham in Genesis 15, he said, they're going to go into bondage for 400 years. They'll be in a strange land, and they will be in servitude there. But I will bring them out, and I will judge that nation that did that to them. Okay? We'll get there as we develop Exodus. What's the last one? He had respect. He acknowledged that all of this was had happened, that they were responding in pleading for him, and now it's time. Okay. So he hears this cry of his people, and it's going to send him into action by bringing somebody new into the story. Jump over to chapter 3, and we're going to look at verse 7. Now, I could spend a lot of time, and you could also parse out a whole bunch of insights from the whole burning bush experience, right? This calling of Moses. But you'll remember Moses, he's out with these sheep. He sees a phenomenon he's never seen, and he decides to go get a closer look because there's this bush. It's burning, or it appears to be burning. It seems like it's on fire, but yet it's not being consumed. This is a puzzling thing. And so he goes over in that direction to get a closer examination. What was it? How do you describe what's going on in the bush that's burning, that's not consumed? It is. Yeah, Dan, that's a good way to say it. In fact, does anybody remember, we've talked about it on a couple of occasions in the past, anybody remember the Hebrew term for glory? Say it. Yes. The Shekinah. In fact, in English, we often say the Shekinah glory. That's really redundant because in Hebrew, it's Shekinah means glory. God in the Old Testament is often seen as a brilliant, bright light. By night, a pillar of fire, right? I believe that what is going on in the burning bush episode is the Hebrew word Shekinah. It's God's glory. He's limited himself in some small way to this point on the globe. It doesn't mean he has abrogated all of his other attributes, but he's manifesting himself in this glory. And that's why it appeared like a fire. That's the only way Moses knew how to describe it. A bush that was on fire that seemed to be, but it's not being consumed. And out of this bush, a voice speaks, right? And so Pam is right. We say Shekinah. The Hebrew word, their way of saying it is Shekinah. Shekinah. But it's an awing thing. And being tied to this glory of God is also going to be tied to this name that God is going to reveal. The first time it's been revealed. But it will be his holiest of names. Okay. So in verse 7 it says, "And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. And I am come down to the Egyptians. And I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land unto a good land, a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come up unto me, and I have also seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppressed them. Come now therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." Okay. So God is revealing to Moses out of this burning bush. Remember when Moses approached it and got close enough, the voice said, "Take off your shoes. The place where you stand is holy ground." To just be that close to the presence of God. This is not the full essence of God. It is very clear from Exodus 32, we'll get there. But what did God say to Moses when Moses said, "God, show me your glory. Show me your Shekinah." Right? What was God's response to Moses? Nobody can see me in my full essence and live. No human will survive that. Remember then he kind of shields him and cleft of the rock? Yeah. Okay. So this voice is coming out to Moses, and God is said, it's time. I'm going to fulfill my promise that I made so many decades, centuries ago to Abraham. Moses, you're the man. Well, first of all, I just want you to see that these verses speak to the fact that God is now starting to put things in motion. Moses, who is 80 years old, is being told, "You're the one I have chosen to do this, Moses." We're going to see Moses react. He's going to decline. I mean, ultimately, over in chapter 3, he's categorically going to say, "You made the first mistake you've ever made, God. You chose. No, it's not me. Pick somebody else." But in this instance, God is saying, again, "I have heard the cry of my people. I've looked upon their plight, and it must end. And Moses, I'm going to send you to Pharaoh to tell him to let my people go." All right? You know, sometimes I know so many of you, and I know your testimony for so long, but we've all experienced those moments of prompting, right? Not an audible voice, but we've felt those nudges by the Holy Spirit. Talk to that person. Talk to that person. Invite them to church. Tell them about your Savior. And all of us probably, if you're like me, probably we have walked away. Maybe because of fear. Maybe because of a feeling of inadequacy. Maybe I won't have the answers that people might ask. And sometimes we've just walked away from those still small voices that are really telling us we should probably do something. And Moses is going to have some of those same responses to God. God is going to say, listen, it's time. I want to give them a land that I promised Abraham. It's a land of the Canaanites. And then he names all these different Canaanite kingdoms within that region, okay? And we'll talk about the conquest at some additional time. But what God is saying here is, I've got a plan, and Moses, you're the one to lead this plan. Okay. Well, God continues in the next couple of verses, and he's going to expand on this promise. Notice what it says in verses 11 and 12. And Moses said unto God, who am I that I should go unto Pharaoh, and that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt? And God said, certainly I will be with thee, and this shall be a token unto you that I have sent thee. When thou hast brought forth the people of Egypt, ye shall serve God upon this mountain. Okay, Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. That's where this burning bush experience is. What other mountain do we call it? What mountain will it be called after the Exodus? Say it. Sinai. Yeah, Mount Sinai. The mountain of God, the place where God is going to give the law to Moses. So, in this instance, God is making this promise, but the promise is not, Moses, you're going to do all this. Good luck. Right? Moses declines. I mean, he starts to, but honestly, at this point in the conversation, I see in Moses not so much a defiance. When he said, who am I? What's that really mean? What's he asking? Are you sure about this? I mean, I'm nobody. You may remember this, what did Jesus say about Moses? That of all men, he was the what? He was the meekest. What an interesting representation of Moses. That he had, remember how the New Testament would describe a godly lady, a godly wife who was meek and quiet in spirit, you know? I mean, they have a spirit, but their demeanor, but that was Moses. Meekness is not weakness, right? We're going to see it blown up in this story, that Moses isn't afraid, but there is an acknowledgement of his inadequacy. It's really a humbleness, isn't it? When he says, who am I? It may reflect an attitude of insecurity and even fear, that You want me to do what? Go back there? Well, God makes it clear right away what? What's God answering him when he said, why me? I can't do this. What's God's response? You're not going to do it, Moses. I'm going to do it. Right? And so Moses is resisting, maybe out of fear, maybe out of humility, but God certainly says in verse 12, certainly I will be with you. And this will be a token. One day you're going to come back to this mountain, and it's going to be after everything's done and everybody's been taken out, and you're going to remember loud and clear, this was my promise to you. When you come back to this mountain with everybody, that's going to be a reminder. It's going to be a token that I fulfilled my word to you. You remember that, Moses, and he will. Okay. Then we come to this most pivotal part of the discussion. I mean, Moses is talking to a bush that seems to be on fire. He knows it's something supernatural. It's part of God revealing his glory. But Moses, in his humanness, verse 13 says, and Moses said unto God, this is the revelation of God, revelation of himself to his people. Okay? And it's going to start right here. And Moses said unto God, behold, when I come unto the children of Israel, and shall say unto them, the God of your fathers has sent me unto you, and they shall say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? Okay, please do not forget this. How long have they been in Egypt? 400 years. There is no way that being in a foreign culture for that long had not rubbed off on these Israelites. Now, they still believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were still, in principle, monotheistic. But Egypt has tons of gods, all kinds of gods. In fact, where did they settle? When they come down to Egypt and they live there for 400 years, what region of Egypt are they in? Goshen, right? Some of you may remember this. Goshen had one of its own gods. I mean, there's a whole bunch of gods in Egypt. You would recognize a bunch of them. Watch some mummy movies. Amun-Ra, Osiris, Horus, Scarabaeus. But there's a god in Goshen. You know what it was that they worshiped there? The golden calf of Goshen. Huh. When they do get back to Mount Sinai, wonder where that idea came from. My point is this. They have been in this polytheistic, pagan circumstance, this culture for centuries now. And you know that it's kind of rubbing off on them. And so Moses asks a relevant question. God, when I go there, and I'm going to tell them, it's time, they're going to say, what God? What's his name? What am I supposed to say? Right? Next verse. Verse 14. And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And God said, thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me. This is the first time God, up to this point in the Bible, has revealed his name. this whole idea of I am could be understood as self-existent. I am the constancy of being. He is and always will be. He is self-existent, same yesterday, today, forever. He is the great creator God, the I am. And he introduces a new name that the Israelites will come to so revere that they will use other names in its place. What is this new name that was so holy? The unnamed name, they would call it, because they would stop saying it in the Israelite culture. Anybody know what the name was? Yes, good. Yahweh. Yahweh. And it became, even when at the beginning when this name was introduced and they were writing it, they would not include any vowels. The way it was pronounced with a hard breathing mark, Yahweh. They would not write the vowels. So they ended up revealing this for a time in the 4 capital letters, Yod, Ha, Ve, Ha, Y, H, W, H. Those 4 capital letters. That's the name pronounced Yahweh. Okay? Later in the Old Testament, it will actually be replaced because they revered this name so much. After Moses gets the 10 Commandments, anybody remember what the 3rd commandment says? Yes, good, Karen. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. And the Jewish people came to revere this name so much that rather than even say it, they would use another name. In the Old Testament, the name Adonai. When you come to any reading of the Old Testament and you see the Lord, Adonai, and it's written in small, all caps, but small letters, small caps. Okay, are you tracking with me? So L-O-R-D, Lord. When you see the Lord, and it's all caps, but they're smaller, that's the name Yahweh. And they replaced it for fear of somehow possibly taking the name of God in vain, that they stopped saying the name. And then Jehovah, okay? Yes, Lord. I'll answer it. Jehovah. J-O-H-A. I don't know how to spell Jehovah. Oh, V, yeah, V. A-H, right? Jehovah. Those are the same letters. But they would say Jehovah and write the vowels in there rather than say Yahweh. But the J and the Y, they substitute for each other. And then the V, okay? So those same vowels are used in Jehovah. All right, enough of that. I just want to emphasize, though, this new name is introduced, and it's to be so revered. But when they say to Moses, because Moses said, he hits it right, who shall I say sent to me? You tell them, I am sent you. I am the self-existent. I am the God who is. It can be translated that way literally. He is. And he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He is the God who has the power to take them out of Egypt. And he's going to reveal that power. And we're going to witness it as he judges the nation that has placed his children in bondage. But he's first of all going to hear the plight of the people. He's going to send a leader, a deliverer, Moses, and he is going to say, above all else, I am the one doing this. Nobody else. I'm doing it, Moses. You just hang on for the ride. Okay? Listen, we're done, but the same principles are true in our life. When we have the dilemmas, we should cry out to God. He will hear his children. And he has the power, he has the authority to answer and do it in a mighty way if necessary. Okay? All right, our time is up. Thank you very much. Could someone please get a hand truck?